is cuim na kai na knimi na sarkari.
Dawn after the battle. A passion without borders. A love that defies destiny. Arhane Hygeia. Epigraph. When loyalty clashes with desire, only love can decide. The heart knows no sides or borders. Summary. Scotland, 15th century. Iain Kerr, a warrior with a heart scarred by the past, leaves the Highlands and swears loyalty to the king. As a border captain, his sole mission is to protect Scotland from English invaders, until an unexpected capture forces him to face a challenge he never anticipated. Eleanor Stafford is no ordinary prisoner. Reckless, untamed, and driven by a hatred forged in tragedy, she has sworn vengeance against the Scots. But when fate binds her to Iain, she is forced to question everything she thought she knew about the enemy, and about her own heart. In a world where loyalty and honor dictate fate, can love break the chains of the past? A story of passion and destiny. Amid oaths of allegiance and the clash of swords, the dawn after the battle plunges us into a romance where passion defies duty, and love becomes the most dangerous refuge. Can Iain and Eleanor find their own fate in a world that demands they be enemies? A love that transcends time. A passion without borders. Prologue. Scotland, 1469. The lowlands on the border with England. The wind swept across the plains with an icy whistle, as if the very earth whispered the laments of countless battles. The Scottish lowlands were a land of perpetual conflict, an open wound between two nations whose hatred flared anew with each generation. Raids were constant, a dangerous game of retaliation where plunder, destruction and vengeance intertwined like poisonous roots between Scotland and England. It was a time of uncertainty. James III, barely a boy, sat on the Scottish throne, while Henry VI struggled to hold on to the English crown, weakened by wars with France and the internal strife of the nobility. The great border families, more loyal to their own lineage than to any distant king, maintained a fragile balance between honor and survival. In this land of steel and ash, justice was dealt by the sword, and loyalty was a currency paid in blood. Amid this whirlwind of treacherous alliances and contested lands, a story was about to unfold. Not one of armies clashing on the battlefield, but of two opposing wills, forced to cross paths at an uncertain crossroads. Iain Kerr, a captain in service of Scotland, knew well the brutality of the border. Raised in the fierce Highlands but hardened by the discipline of war, he was a man of honor, though the world he lived in seldom allowed it. He had learned that mercy could be a weakness, and yet fate was about to test his certainties. And Eleanor Stafford, an English lady, yet with the spirit of a warrior. The daughter of a powerful baron, she had been trained in strategy as much as in courtly arts. Her lineage granted her privileges, but it also condemned her to a world where her fate was not her own. Captured in enemy lands, her spirit refused to bow. The war between two kingdoms would be mirrored in the silent battle between them. A captivity, a negotiation, a clash of wills that could alter the balance of the border. For in Scotland in 1469, men and women did not fight only with swords. They fought with words, with pride, and sometimes with the heart. Chapter 1. When war divides, love defies fate. Iain Kerr gazed at the landscape through a narrow opening in the stone walls of Ferniehirst. It was not a simple window but a scar in the rock, a testament to ancient battles fought in this wild borderland between Scotland and England. The wind carried the echoes of old clashes and the scent of withered heather, as if the very earth remembered every drop of spilled blood. From that stone watchtower he could see the rolling hills stretching southward, a treacherous terrain where war never truly slept. For 5 years he had served at Ferniehirst, first as a foot soldier and more recently as captain. His rise had been as swift as it was inevitable, the result of both his skill with the sword and the favour of young King James III of Scotland. The weight of responsibility pressed upon his shoulders, as heavily as the sword at his hip. Keeping the border secure was a thankless task, a constant game of raids, revenge, and fragile truces. And now, with an English prisoner in his custody, tensions threatened to ignite once more. The honor of his rank did not prevent him from feeling restless, as if the border itself had trapped him between past and future, between duty and a longing he could not define. But any thought was shattered as the sentry's cry tore through the air. "Ferniehirst is burning. Damn English." The smell of smoke reached him before his eyes confirmed the tragedy. He leaped onto his horse and with a fierce cry of "For King James and for Scotland," spurred his men into a gallop toward the village. What they found was worse than he had imagined, fire consuming everything, ashes swirling in the air, and the stench of burned flesh clinging to every corner. Rage burned within him like the very flames around them. He ordered his second-in-command, Mark Douglas, to search for survivors, while he and a small group set off in pursuit of the attackers, whose dust trail was still visible on the horizon. He rode with determination, closing the distance between him and the fleeing raiders. At the head of the retreating column, a lone figure in a dark cloak galloped with undeniable skill. Iain clenched his teeth and shouted in English, "Stop and surrender." But the rider did not obey. Instead they spurred their horse even harder. Iain cursed and urged his own mount forward, pressing until he was nearly alongside them. He watched the way the rider controlled the horse, light, swift, moving like a demon of the border. With one final effort, he seized the enemy's reins, forcing the horse to halt. The rider did not hesitate. They leaped from the saddle mid-gallop and bolted. Exasperated, Iain did the same. He chased them, dodging branches and leaping over obstacles until he lunged, tackling them both to the ground. He pinned the fugitives' wrists, ready to subdue them once and for all. But as he locked eyes on their face, he froze. Blue eyes enormous and burning with fury. Freckled skin. Blonde hair spilling from beneath the hood. "Dear God," he murmured, stunned. It was a woman. The shock made him loosen his grip for an instant, just long enough for her to punch him squarely in the jaw. Iain grunted, and after a brief struggle managed to pin her down completely. "Calm yourself or I'll knock you out," he growled, breathing hard. She glared at him with unyielding defiance. "Then start by getting off me, you savage Scot." A mix of disbelief and irritation surged through him. He hauled her to her feet, not loosening his grip for a second. She was small, but her spirit more than made up for her size. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, still struggling. "You are my prisoner." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Prisoner? This is a mistake. I haven't killed anyone." Iain let out a dry laugh. "Lies." She pressed her lips together, furious. They walked in silence for a stretch before she spoke again. "The villagers were alive when we left. If they're dead now, it wasn't by our hands. I swear to you, we didn't kill anyone." The captain ignored her, his jaw tightening. "And my men," she insisted. "I hope they're alive, because if they're not, that, my dear lady, is something you should have considered before raiding a village. They stole our sheep. We only." "That does not justify death," he cut her off sharply. "But we didn't kill them," she insisted, her voice breaking between anger and desperation. Iain did not respond. He could not believe her, and though there was something in her words that rang true, his duty was clear: take her to the stronghold and uncover the truth. Because if she was responsible for the massacre, there would be no mercy. Iain Kerr gripped the prisoner's wrists tightly, as he led her uphill toward where they had left the horses. His hold was firm, unyielding, but not cruel. He would not allow himself to falter, not with the blood still hot in his veins after the chase, not with the uncertainty of what his men might have found in the smoldering ruins of Ferniehirst. She struggled, of course she did. That did not surprise him. He had seen her skill in the escape, the way she moved with the land as if it belonged to her. But now, captured, she had no choice but to keep pace with him. Iain barely spared her a glance. He owed her no explanations. "I would like to go home," she insisted. He held back an ironic smile. As if it were that simple. After what had happened at Ferniehurst, after the massacre his men had witnessed, he could not simply let her walk free.
"Have you lost your tongue?" she pressed impatiently.
Iain kept moving, his long strides forcing her into a half-run to keep up. The weight of responsibility still pressed on his shoulders, the devastation at Ferniehurst, the screams echoing in his memory, the uncertainty of how many of his own had fallen. And now he had this woman as a prisoner, a woman who had almost escaped him. That irritated him more than he was willing to admit. "I am speaking to you, you filthy Scot," she snapped. Iain turned so abruptly that she stumbled against his chest. He took advantage of their proximity to fix her with a fierce glare.
"Shut up," he roared.
"One more word and I will gag you." She met his fury with her own but did not back down. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are a murderer and my prisoner." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "A murderer? But I have killed no one."
"Lies."
He resumed walking, ignoring the way she furrowed her brow, confusion written all over her face. For a brief moment, Iain hesitated. Her tone was not that of a guilty woman. But he could not afford doubt. The circumstances were against her. His people lay dead among the ashes of Ferniehurst, and she had fled like a criminal. Without another word he tightened his grip and continued forward. She kept resisting, struggling against his hold, but Iain did not relent. Not until he uncovered the whole truth. The silence between them grew thick, laden with more than just tension. Eleanor kept her back straight, her chin lifted with an innate pride. As they rode back to the stronghold, Iain watched her out of the corner of his eye. The woman's determination was admirable, but also a double-edged sword. He wondered how much of her bravery was real, and how much was sheer stubbornness. At last she broke the silence. "You must be terribly bored," she exclaimed with a hint of irony, as if trying to provoke him. Iain did not take the bait. He knew she was trying to draw him out, to challenge him, to break his composure. But he would not give her that satisfaction. Despite his youth, he was no fool. He recognized beauty when it was before him, her luminous skin, the natural rosiness of her lips, the golden strands escaping from her cloak in rebellious locks. But he would not be distracted. "You have not answered me," he said, steering the conversation elsewhere. "Where are you from?" She straightened even more, that air of arrogance seemingly etched into her very being. "From a vast estate near Brackenford." "And your name?" For a brief moment hesitation flickered across her face, but she finally replied. "Eleanor. Eleanor Stafford." The surname struck a chord in Iain's memory. He frowned, searching his mind while letting the landscape unfold before him. The lowlands were not like the Highlands, the horizon here was less rugged, less wild. And it reminded him of how much he missed home. His chest tightened at the thought of his family, of the youthful days spent alongside his brothers. Most of all he thought of Agnes, his brother Alistair's wife, who had been his anchor in darker times. He shook off the memories, they were distractions he could not afford. As they neared the village, the acrid scent of charred flesh clung to the air. A dull ache settled in Iain's chest, one he usually kept buried. The memories of past battles, of ruined villages, struck him with the same force as always. Mark, his second in command, rode up to him with a look of expectant seriousness. "Well?" Iain asked. The villagers were locked inside the chapel. There were no casualties. Iain nodded, feeling a wave of relief. The woman had not lied, after all. Yet that did not change the fact that he had to take action, to prevent an endless cycle of retribution and violence. "And on your end," he continued. "The same. We captured all of them, just as you instructed, Captain." "Good." As Iain turned his attention to the prisoners, he felt Mark's gaze on him. His friend had questions, that much he knew. But Mark would wait until they were alone to ask them. They trusted each other like brothers in arms, and that meant the redhead knew when to speak and when to stay silent. Mark explained that the English justified their attack as retaliation for stolen sheep. Iain wasn't convinced. Why burn everything over a few sheep? To prove their resolve. They start with the livestock, and if we respond there will be blood. Perhaps. But his instincts told him this was part of something bigger. He glanced at the woman, who sat tall in the saddle with an expression of cold dignity. "Do you have anything to add?" he asked, addressing Eleanor. She met his gaze without hesitation, lifting her chin in defiance. "Let me go, and there will be no reprisals." Iain let out a crooked smile. In that moment, the missing piece fell into place in his mind. Stafford. Now he understood who she was, and why her presence in his lands meant more than mere chance. Her father was a powerful baron, under the watchful eye of the Scottish governor. Keeping her here was the key to preventing an escalation at the border. "There will be no reprisals," he stated, "because I will make sure your father stays quiet." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time a flicker of doubt crossed her face. "You have no right to keep me prisoner." "I have every right." Iain shot back, his voice firm. "You are in my home." "I am not in your home," she retorted, "but in Scottish lands that will soon be ours." Iain let out a dry laugh. "In your dreams, lass." The fire in her eyes challenged him once more. The tension in the air was palpable. Iain noticed how his men watched the exchange, amused at the rare sight of their captain being defied in such a way. But he couldn't afford to yield. Eleanor Stafford was his prisoner. And if holding her meant avoiding a war, then she would remain so for as long as necessary. The soldiers looked on with evident entertainment. They had never seen their captain face off against a woman so fierce. "Let's fight fair, and you'll see I am no fragile, delicate lady," she declared. She was afraid of nothing. Iain handed his horse's reins to Mark, and strode toward the group of captured Englishmen. His gaze settled on one of them, a man who met his stare with his chin held high. "On your feet." The guards forced him to stand. "Your name?" The man shot a quick glance at Eleanor before answering. "Robert Stafford." Iain arched a brow. "Are you kin to her?" "I am her father's kinsman and most trusted man." A calculated smile curved Ian's lips. "Tell her father I have his daughter. She will remain my prisoner, until he abandons his conquest of the border." The glint in Robert's eyes confirmed his suspicions. He didn't seem troubled. In fact, he seemed satisfied. Iain knew all too well that in the English court, power plays were as deadly as swords. Perhaps this man had his own plans for the Stafford family. "Take the prisoners to the border," he ordered Mark. "We return to the stronghold." As the Englishmen were bound and prepared for departure, Eleanor turned to him in fury. "My father will kill you." Iain shrugged. "Quite the opposite. I think he will do nothing. Or perhaps, you don't mean that much to him." The flash of pain in her face was fleeting, but he caught it. Then, with the same haughty air as always, she replied, "He cares for me. If he stays in his place, all will be well." She said nothing. But Iain knew, this battle was only beginning. Chapter 2. Between the sword and passion, there is no victory without sacrifice. Eleanor wiped her tears away with a gesture of fury. She couldn't afford weakness. She was at a disadvantage, yes, but that didn't mean she was defenseless. If there was one thing she had learned over the years, it was that men had weaknesses, and that damned Scot was no exception. She had felt it. When he had brought her down, when their bodies had clashed in battle, something had shifted in his demeanor. His strength had not wavered, but for an instant, just a whisper in time, his body had tensed with desire. A weakness. One she had to exploit. If she couldn't defeat him on the battlefield, she would do so with intelligence. She knew how to awaken desire in men. She had seen it too many times, even in those who should have considered her untouchable. Her father's trusted man, Robert, was the vilest proof of that. The thought churned inside her. She despised him with every fiber of her being. His greedy eyes, his sticky breath on her neck when he got too close, the way he looked at her as if she already belonged to him. But Eleanor belonged to no one, nor would she ever. She had sworn it. The wind lashed against her face as the column of soldiers crossed the fortress gates. The imposing stone structure loomed over her, its shadow a brutal reminder that she was now in enemy territory. The thick walls, the battlements bristling with soldiers, the towering keep standing like an unyielding sentinel. Everything spoke of resilience, of a history forged in steel and blood. A shiver ran down her spine, but she forced herself to keep her head high. She wouldn't let that Scot see her fear. "You have nothing to fear, we are not savages," said a firm voice beside her. She lifted her gaze and found the captain's green eyes fixed on hers. They were hard, unreadable, but not cruel. Eleanor let out a cold laugh. "Oh, you are savages," she replied haughtily. "But nothing will happen to you," he interrupted calmly, dismounting in one swift motion. Before she could react, he gave a sharp tug on the rope that still bound her. Eleanor was about to protest, but the words died in her throat when her skin brushed against his. A strange current surged through her, an unexpected heat that made her recoil as if she had touched something forbidden. Her eyes widened, and for an instant she saw the same flicker of surprise in the captain's face. But he recovered immediately, his features hardening once more. Something flashed in his eyes, anger, contempt. Eleanor didn't understand, but one thing was certain, she couldn't lower her guard. Not here. Not with him. The air in the infirmary was thick with the sharp scent of dried herbs and medicinal ointments. The brazier's fire crackled softly in the corner, casting flickering shadows against the stone walls. Eleanor tried to ignore the sting on her wrists, focusing instead on the captain, who watched her with the same intensity a hawk would have for its prey. "Are you going to speak to me in that tone every time, or do I have the right to expect a different kind of behavior from you?" she inquired, lifting her chin. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her arm with a roughness that took her by surprise and pulled her toward him. A small gasp escaped her lips as she lost her balance, her hands instinctively gripping his firm shoulders. His closeness disarmed her completely. An unexpected heat surged through her skin, leaving her breathless for an instant. "Let me go," she muttered, trying to regain control of her body and thoughts. But he pushed her away just as abruptly, as if the contact disgusted him. The movement was so sudden that Eleanor stumbled.
"Then follow orders," he snapped harshly. "Now come with me."
"Where?" "The infirmary," he answered curtly before turning away, not waiting for a reply. Eleanor pressed her lips together, swallowing a sharp retort. She had no choice. If she attempted to escape now, with the gates closed and every corner of the stronghold guarded, she would only find herself in an even worse predicament. No, she had to be patient. She would find a way out, but not yet. Then she felt the warm moisture on her hands. She looked down and saw the blood staining her skin. The bindings had bitten into her flesh more than she had realized. So he had noticed. A chill ran down her spine. Was it possible that the captain knew even what was running through her mind? That he could read her with those dark, impenetrable eyes? She told herself it was impossible, yet the unease remained. As they moved through the stone corridors, Eleanor took in every detail of her surroundings, searching for a possible escape route. The arrival of supplies might offer an opportunity. Perhaps she could hide among the carts of provisions or find an exit through the kitchens. Yes, she had to explore those options.
But for now, she had to endure the captain's company.
Upon reaching the infirmary, a middle-aged man dressed in simple garments greeted them with a respectful nod. "Captain," he said, his tone deferential. Eleanor immediately noticed the air of respect with which he addressed her captor. This man commanded obedience not just because of his rank, but because of something else, something that went beyond military authority. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. "Show him your hands," he ordered, his gaze never leaving her. Eleanor obeyed, though with clear reluctance. She despised his imperious tone, but she didn't want to prolong her suffering any further. The healer took her hands gently, examining the wounds with an experienced eye. As the captain explained the situation to the healer, Eleanor found herself watching him again. His stance was that of a warrior accustomed to battle, legs apart, arms crossed over his chest, the fabric of his shirt stretched across the powerful muscles of his shoulders and arms. The hilts of his swords peeked over his shoulders, and a dagger hung from his belt. Without realizing it, her gaze drifted lower, taking in the tartan kilt he wore. The mere thought of what might or might not be beneath it made her swallow hard. A strange heat settled in the pit of her stomach. Damn it!
What was wrong with her?
Why was her body reacting this way to a man who was nothing more than her jailer? She scolded herself in silence, forcing those thoughts from her mind. The captain was watching her. When their eyes met, Eleanor saw a flicker of amusement in his gaze. "Don't you have anything better to do than stand around here? I thought a captain of the guard would be much busier." The healer chuckled softly, but immediately fell silent when the captain shot him a warning look.
"Hurry up," he ordered coldly. "I need to take her back to her cell."
A knot tightened in Eleanor's stomach.
"You're locking me up. What did you expect?
A guided tour of the fortress?" She gave him her best smile, a calculated smile, the kind that made men lower their guard.
"Why not?
I'd love to learn more about this place, and about you." The captain didn't answer, but the slight curve of his lips told her he understood exactly what she was doing. Before she could continue her game, a sudden sting burned her wrist, and she let out a small cry. "I'm sorry, miss," the healer said.
"But the wounds are deep.
I have to clean them." Eleanor clenched her teeth, suppressing a tear of pain. She wouldn't allow herself to show weakness. She had spent years preparing to face life like a soldier, but now her own body was betraying her. The captain watched the scene with a smug smile. "If it's not treated properly, the infection might force us to cut off your hand," he said with mock cruelty. Eleanor shot him a furious glare. "Do you enjoy tormenting me?" "Very much," he replied, utterly unfazed. "So I've gone from being a prisoner to mere entertainment. How delightful, Captain. What's next? Tying me up and whipping me?" The gleam in the Scots' eyes darkened. "Don't tempt me, lass." That feeling again. That unsettling sensation in her body. Eleanor averted her gaze, trying to regain control over herself. "You promised not to hurt me." "I promised nothing," he countered with a smirk.
"Yes, you did."
He laughed. "If you behave. And if I don't. Then it'll be more interesting." A shiver ran down Eleanor's spine. She wasn't sure if that threat terrified her or intrigued her. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "Since I'm a political prisoner, I have rights, don't I?" "Political prisoner," he scoffed. "Where did you learn that word?" "I can read, Captain," she replied haughtily. "Something that, from what I've heard, isn't common among Scots." He didn't take the bait. "You've been taught wrong. We can read. How do you think we learned your language?" Eleanor felt her frustration grow. This man was an enigma, an impenetrable fortress. But she wouldn't give up. If he intended to play with her mind, she would play with his. And she would win. Eleanor's despair tightened into a crushing knot in her throat. She could barely breathe as the captain dragged her down the stairs. The air grew heavier with each step into the depths of the fortress, thick with dampness and the fetid stench of filth and death. Her mind fought against the images her senses forced upon her. Men had perished here, left to rot. Englishmen. People from her land. She tried to stand firm, but her courage faltered. An ancient panic, long buried in her memory, surfaced with brutal force. Like a wicked whisper, the image of her mother, the chaos, the blood of that cursed day enveloped her. A shiver ran down her spine, and an involuntary tremor seized her body. "Please no." Her voice was barely a broken murmur, nearly inaudible. The captain seemed not to hear her, or perhaps he simply ignored her. In response to her resistance, he pulled harder, forcing her to match his hurried pace. Eleanor wanted to fight, or at least plead more fervently, but fear paralyzed her tongue and clouded her mind. Everything became a blur. She struggled to breathe, to think. She couldn't move, trapped in absolute terror. If only he had looked at her. If only he had seen the terror in her eyes. But he didn't. The silence of the fortress was overwhelming. No one would come to her aid. No one would even hear her pleas. When the captain shoved her in front of a cell door, Eleanor felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Her legs turned to lead. The anguish in her chest was unbearable, impossible to hide. And then he looked at her. For a brief moment, the harshness in his expression seemed to waver. "Don't do this. I beg you." Her voice shook, but she managed to say it clearly. He hesitated. A second. Maybe two. But the flicker of doubt vanished as quickly as it had come. "I'm sorry. It's the rule," he said at last. The gesture he made, motioning for her to enter, had a cruelly ceremonious air. Like a gentleman inviting a lady to dance.
But this was no dance.
This was a sentence. Eleanor swallowed the panic choking her, and forced her body to move. One step. Then, another. Each heavier than the last. She couldn't let him see how much this was breaking her, how much it terrified her. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of watching her crumble. But the moment she crossed the threshold, something inside her shattered. The door shut with a dull thud. Eleanor turned immediately, gripping the iron bars as if they were her last salvation. Her eyes searched for him. He was still there, watching her. For an instant, she thought she saw something more than indifference in his face. Doubt. Regret. Hope flickered within her like a fragile flame. She was about to speak, to plead with him one last time. But he turned and walked away. "Don't leave me here," she whispered, her voice barely a thread of sound. The captain's footsteps echoed, growing fainter. "Don't leave me here," she cried out, banging on the door.
"You have no right." But deep down she knew he did.
She was his prisoner. Her scream crumbled into a desperate sob. She pounded the door again and again, until her strength gave out. She sank against the cold wood and wept. She wept until there were no more tears left in her. When she could finally breathe again, she lifted her gaze. The cell was cleaner than she had expected. A high window let in the pale daylight. In the corner, a latrine. It was not the hell her mind had imagined, but the night had yet to come. She forced herself to steady her breathing. She couldn't drown in fear. She moved toward the straw cot and curled up on it. She would sleep during the day. That way, when darkness fell and her nightmares came to devour her, she could stay awake. She could watch the stars. She could keep her demons at bay. Chapter 3. In times of war, love is the most dangerous battle. Iain descended the stairs with steady steps, each creak of the wood beneath his weight echoing in the morning silence of the fortress. The chill of dawn still clung to the air, seeping through the stone walls, but he remained unfazed. He had made his decision. He would see the prisoner. Not because he wanted to, not because her image had lodged itself in his mind like a curse he couldn't dispel, but because it was his duty. Reaching the lower level, he found the guard stationed at the cell door. His back was straight, his expression severe, but the moment he caught sight of his captain, his posture tensed even further, as if Iain Kerr's mere presence was enough to remind him of the gravity of his task. "Any trouble?" Iain asked quietly, though his tone carried the sharpness of a command. "No, my lord," the soldier replied. "I brought her bread and some broth last night, as you ordered. Also the blankets. She hasn't caused any disturbances." Iain nodded, his fingers brushing against the keys hanging from the guard's belt. "Open it." The man hesitated for a brief moment, not because he questioned the order, but because no soldier under his command ever dared act without his explicit permission. Finally, he obeyed. The key turned in the lock with a metallic click, and the door groaned open. The cell's interior was dark, with only a thin sliver of light filtering through the small opening in the stone. Even so, Iain saw her. Eleanor was curled up in a corner, wrapped in the blankets she'd been given. Her hair fell in a messy cascade over her shoulders, and her posture spoke of an inner struggle, dignity fighting to hold its ground against despair. But her eyes struck him the most. They no longer held the fierce defiance of the warrior who had faced him so bravely in the forest. No, there was something deeper in her gaze. Something that wasn't just fear. Iain closed the door behind him, taking a step forward. Eleanor didn't move, but her body tensed ever so slightly, as if forcing herself to remain still in his presence. "You've been treated well," he stated rather than asked. She took a moment to respond. Her throat seemed to work through the words before releasing them. "As well as a prisoner can be treated." Her voice was steady, but her tone lacked the venom he had expected. There was no defiance. Only resignation. A faint, uncomfortable pang settled in Ian's chest. He didn't know why, but that resignation was harder to bear than her anger. "You won't be here forever," he told her, crossing his arms. "Only until things with your father are settled." Eleanor lifted her gaze, and for an instant the vulnerability in her expression cracked just enough to reveal something else: disbelief. "You think this will be resolved easily?" she asked with a bitter laugh. "My father won't yield. To him, this is an insult. Do you really believe he'll negotiate?" Iain clenched his jaw. He knew she was right. Stafford wasn't a man to let an offense go unpunished. But he wasn't ready to admit that just yet.
"That remains to be seen."
Eleanor studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher him. Then with a quiet sigh she looked away, fixing her gaze on the stone floor.
"Why did you come?"
A sharp pang shot through him. He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't admit that unease had driven him here, that her image had followed him even into his dreams. "To make sure you're still alive." Eleanor let out a soft, humorless chuckle.
"What an honor."
Her sarcasm didn't go unnoticed, but instead of irritating him, it felt like a brief flicker of the woman he had met in the forest. He turned toward the door. There was no point in prolonging the conversation. She was fine, and he had satisfied his damned curiosity.
But before he left, he heard her murmur,
"If you truly wanted to make sure I was well, then perhaps you should have come sooner." Iain paused for a second. He didn't reply. He simply let the door close behind him, his mind filled with the echo of her words. Chapter 4. Two enemy souls, one impossible destiny. Eleanor walked with steady steps, though inside a storm of emotions raged mercilessly. The crisp morning air wrapped around her like a balm, but it wasn't enough to quell the heat coursing through her from deep within. She held her head high, maintaining the illusion of intact dignity, but each time her mind betrayed her with the image of the Scottish captain, his damp clothes clinging to his torso, the rigidity in her back faltered for just a moment. She pressed her lips together. She couldn't allow herself such thoughts. Not now. The guard escorting her kept a cautious distance, avoiding her gaze. Eleanor wasn't sure if it was by the captain's explicit order, or if the soldier himself feared the power of an English noblewoman trapped in enemy lands. Either way, his presence was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the image she had left behind in that dim cell, the man who, despite everything, stirred something in her beyond hatred. She let out a heavy sigh, as if exhaling alone could free her from the hold he had over her. But it wasn't that simple. She stopped at the edge of the wall, letting her gaze wander over the landscape. The River Tweed wound its way in the distance, its surface glinting under the first light of day. Beyond it, dark forests stretched like an impenetrable barrier, and above the hills columns of smoke curled toward the sky. Were they farmhouses, or the remnants of a recent attack? Her body tensed. That smoke could be a clue about what was happening beyond her prison, about the conflict she had been unwillingly caught in. Eleanor knew her captivity wouldn't last forever, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. Were they negotiating her ransom? Or was she being held for other purposes? "Don't wander too far," the guard grunted, breaking her reverie. She cast him an impassive glance, before turning back to the horizon. She wanted to stay just a little longer, to feel the open air, to convince herself she still had control over something, but she wasn't left undisturbed for long. The sound of firm footsteps echoed behind her. Footsteps she recognized instantly. Her heart betrayed her, quickening. "You've taken your time leaving your cell, milady," murmured a deep voice. Eleanor didn't turn immediately. She forced herself to suppress the unease creeping over her, before facing the unmistakable figure of the captain. When she finally turned to him, her eyes met his, sharp and green as a dagger. "I was taking the opportunity to breathe fresh air, since I don't know when I'll have it again." Her voice was calm, almost indifferent, but something in her stance betrayed her. The Scot tilted his head slightly, scrutinizing her with an irritating perceptiveness.
"I'm not so cruel as to deprive you of that."
"Oh, how generous," Eleanor whispered, a smile touching her lips but never reaching her eyes. The captain didn't respond right away. He seemed to weigh whether to ignore her insolence or match her sharpness. In the end, he only watched her with the intensity of a man studying a chess piece before deciding his next move.
"How long do you plan to keep me here?" she asked, crossing her arms. "That will depend on many things," he replied, refusing to rise to her provocation.
Eleanor frowned. She loathed the way he avoided giving her direct answers. She loathed even more that his mere presence was enough to unsettle her balance.
"Many things."
What an eloquent answer, she scoffed. The captain smirked slightly, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "Are you growing impatient with our hospitality?" She wanted to snap back but held her tongue. She knew better than to show weakness. This man was a formidable opponent, not just because of his strength but because of his cunning. If she wanted to use his desire against him, if she wanted to tip the scales in her favor, she had to be patient. So instead of responding with venom, she softened her expression. She lowered her gaze slightly, not in submission but like someone hiding an ace up their sleeve.
"Let's just say I long to return home."
The Scot didn't reply immediately. His eyes swept over her face with caution, as if searching for something he had yet to understand. "I understand," he said at last. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected that response. The captain said nothing more. He simply stood there, watching her with a disconcerting intensity. For a moment, Eleanor felt as if he had seen past her defiant stance, past her game of seduction and hatred. And that unsettled her more than anything else. Without another word, the Scot gave a slight nod to the guard and walked away. Eleanor remained still, the cold wind brushing against her skin, her mind in turmoil. When he was out of sight, she realized her body still held the tension of his presence. And deep down, she was no longer so certain of what she truly desired. Chapter 5.
The Wild Heart and the Invisible Bond.
The threshold closed behind her with a sharp thud, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She walked with her chin held high, feigning a composure that was becoming harder to maintain. Her heart still pounded in her chest, like a wild horse resisting the reins. Back in the darkness of her cell, frustration wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. She had thought that a formal request, perhaps laced with a touch of flirtation, might make the captain more yielding.
But she had underestimated the Scots' resolve.
"Damn you, Iain," she whispered into the empty space, knowing that even if her plan had failed, the battle was far from over. Iain remained seated behind his solid wooden desk, fingers intertwined beneath his chin, eyes fixed on the door through which Eleanor had just left. The woman was a storm wrapped in the guise of a noble lady, a dangerous mix of fierceness and pride that would make his days more complicated. He exhaled with resignation and rose, moving toward the window. From there he could see the fort's courtyard, soldiers going about their usual routines, oblivious to the tempest brewing inside him. His lips curled in displeasure. He was all too aware of his reaction to her, of how her mere presence unsettled him more than he was willing to admit. He had seen the same disturbance in her blue gaze, the same turmoil he felt. A woman like that could be both a weapon and a threat. He couldn't afford distractions. With a low growl, he stepped away from the window. War loomed on the horizon, and the last thing he needed was a battle within himself. Chapter 6. When war tears them apart, love defies destiny. The firelight danced across the stone walls, casting elongated shadows over the frayed tapestries. The crackling of the wood filled the silence between them, heavy as the steel of armor. Eleanor stood by the window, her back straight, her gaze lost in the Scottish night. Despite the harshness of the journey, the filth and captivity, she carried herself with a fierce dignity, like a marble statue carved by sheer will and pride. Iain watched her from the shadows. Her mere presence ignited something within him, something he neither understood nor accepted. He was a warrior, a leader, a man accustomed to blood and battle, not to the uncertainty that this woman stirred in him. He stepped closer, his movements firm, and though he did not touch her, he felt the way she tensed as soon as she sensed him behind her. He could see the subtle shift of her breath, the way her hands curled into fists, ready to defend herself if necessary. A woman willing to fight to the very end. "I am not your enemy, Eleanor," he murmured, his voice low. She turned her head slowly, her eyes gleaming like a storm-tossed sea. "Then release me." Her tone was steady, but there was a barely concealed plea beneath it. Iain narrowed his eyes, studying her. How much courage there was in this woman, and how much defiance. "I can't," he admitted. "But I can invite you to dinner, so you might forgive me." The Englishwoman let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I attacked you, and you want me to forgive you?" Iain smiled, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw the flicker of surprise in her expression. "I told you, I'm not your enemy." Eleanor straightened slightly, as if the mere idea of accepting anything from him repulsed her. "And if I refuse?" Iain arched a brow. "As you wish." He turned to leave when he heard her call out, "Wait." He paused, glancing back at her. "What do you propose?" She hesitated for a moment, before speaking in a quieter voice. "I suppose I am a little hungry." Something in her tone, a mix of resignation and defiance, surprised him. He nodded, motioning for her to follow. Eleanor pulled her cloak tighter over her still disheveled shirt, walking beside him with her head held high, as if pride alone kept her from appearing anything less than a lady, even in captivity. They moved through the stone corridors in silence. Iain felt her presence like a burning ember, a fire both dangerous and mesmerizing. Without meaning to, his fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting touch, an insignificant moment, and yet a shiver ran down his arm as if lightning had struck him. When they entered his study, the warmth of the fire greeted them. Duncan, his aide, had lit the candelabras, and the room felt less austere under the flickering light. Eleanor stepped toward the window, as if searching for freedom beyond the castle walls. Iain watched her in silence. His gaze traced the curve of her waist, the way the fabric of her breeches hugged her form. He forced himself to look away before his mind betrayed him. Unfastening the belt that held his claymores, he let it drop with a dull thud against the floor. He kept only his dagger. Then he walked until he was just behind her, barely a breath of space between them. The scent of her hair, heather and wildflowers filled his senses. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Are you always this quiet?" Eleanor asked suddenly, without turning. Iain tilted his head, amused. "I don't care for unnecessary words." She let out a soft huff. "Of course. Everything you do is necessary, even abducting women." Iain felt the sting of her irony, but his expression remained impassive. "If it's any consolation, I never intended to take you." Eleanor turned then, her face just inches from his. "Oh. Then what was it?" Ian's gaze flickered briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Strategy." She didn't step back, though her hands clutched tightly at the folds of her cloak. "And what do you intend to do with me now, my lord?" Her voice was a challenge, but there was a note of uncertainty beneath it. Iain held her gaze for a long moment. He knew what he wanted to do to her, what his body burned to claim. But he mustn't. He couldn't. Forcing himself to smirk, he moved deliberately, reaching for a jug of wine on the table and pouring 2 cups. He offered her one.
"For now, dinner."
Eleanor hesitated for a moment, before taking the cup cautiously. Their fingers brushed, and both felt the jolt of electricity pass between them like lightning in the heart of a storm. The night was far from over. And neither of them knew what game they had just begun to play. The night air seeped through the battlements of the fortress, carrying the scent of the nearby forest and the distant sea. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, trying to fight off the cold that clung to her like an invisible shroud. Her hair, unbound and tousled by the wind, danced around her face with a wildness that matched her spirit. She stepped closer to the wall, pressing her hands against the rough stone, feeling its chill beneath her fingers. Iain watched her in silence. There was something in the way she gazed into the darkness beyond the fortress, as if searching for something that would never return. Something she had lost long before arriving here. Her story, her unseen scars had settled deep within him, more than he cared to admit. Without thinking too much about it, he unfastened his leather cuirass and slipped off the woolen vest beneath it. With steady steps he approached her and without a word, draped it over her shoulders. Eleanor barely flinched at the warmth of the garment, and the scent of him woven into the fabric. She looked up at her captor, finding his gaze steady and restrained. "I don't want you falling ill," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper carried away by the wind between them. She narrowed her eyes, scrutinizing him with suspicion. "Now you care about my well-being?" Iain met her gaze without blinking. "I am your captor, not your executioner." Eleanor let out a brief, bitter laugh. "An interesting distinction." He inclined his head slightly, accepting her rebuke without argument. For a few moments they remained that way, caught in the silent tension that had settled between them since the very first day. Eleanor turned her gaze to the horizon. From there the night stretched out like a vast cloak of shadows, dotted with the flickering lights of distant fires.
"When I was a child," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper, "I used to climb to the tower of my home and watch the stars.
I thought that if I stayed long enough in silence, I could hear the sound of the stories they whispered." Iain didn't respond immediately. The vulnerability in her voice took him by surprise.
"And what stories did you hear?" he finally asked.
Eleanor gave a faint smile. "The stories of the heroes, who never arrived in time." There was a long silence. Iain felt an unexpected pang in his chest, a weight without a name.
"Not all heroes arrive in time," he said gently. "Some don't even exist."
She turned her head toward him, her eyes reflecting the same intensity of the night. "I know." The wind rose again, cold and fierce. Eleanor pressed the edges of the vest against herself, not breaking her gaze from Iain. Something changed in her expression, something he couldn't fully decipher. "We should go down," he murmured, trying to break the tension. She nodded slowly but didn't move. Iain felt his body respond to her closeness, to the dangerous game they both seemed to be weaving unintentionally. He knew he should pull away, keep his distance. Yet he didn't. Eleanor was the first to look away. She turned slowly and began walking back toward the stone stairs. Iain followed her, feeling that with each step he was falling deeper into an abyss from which he might never be able to escape. He felt her shudder as his fingers brushed her shoulders, and even more so when inadvertently their hands met in the awkward attempt to fasten her clothing around her. Eleanor held her breath. The closeness was suffocating, electrifying. Then he slightly turned his head and buried his eyes in hers, as if searching for an answer there that he didn't dare to voice aloud. "Thank you, Captain. You're very kind." Her voice was a whisper, a warm breath that vanished between them, but the words left a lingering echo. Iain slowly withdrew his hands, as if he wanted to extend the contact for just a moment longer, as if by doing so he could imprint the sensation of her touch on his skin. Yet, all he could do was remain steady, holding back the storm raging inside him. He stood beside her and looked up at the starry sky. "Did you doubt it?" He felt her gaze fixed on him, intense, inquisitive.
"Yes and no," she confessed after a pause.
"He's different from the other Scots, and I must admit different from men in general. At least, from the ones I'm used to." He tilted his head with curiosity.
"What kind of men?"
She let out a brief laugh, a dry laugh without joy. "They could be English, but some are just as detestable." Iain clenched his jaw.
"Have they disrespected you?" "No, never.
Because my father protects me.
But the day he's not around, I expect the worst."
"I think my trusted man Robert is the worst of them all." The mention of that name caused him an unpleasant sensation, a warning instinct.
"Does he want to marry you to take your land?"
Eleanor burst into an unexpected laugh, as if the mere idea seemed absurd to her. Iain looked at her, puzzled. "Did I say something funny?" He frowned, though she didn't seem to take offense. "Since we met, I've wondered if you might be the devil himself, always knowing what I'm thinking." He smiled, and with that the tension between them seemed to dissipate momentarily. But it was a fragile truce, barely held together by the shadows of the night. "Are you referring to when you tried to escape, or when you tried to kill me?" he murmured with a slight tilt of his head. "Or maybe when I knew you wouldn't, even when I turned my back on you." Eleanor's laughter faded. Iain felt a shiver on his skin, as she suddenly grew serious. "I can't hide anything from you, Captain." "That's what I meant," she admitted in a grave tone.
"How do you do it?"
"I don't know." And it was true. He didn't know. He didn't want to admit that she had become an obsession, that every gesture of hers affected him more than he was willing to acknowledge. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with more than just curiosity as she whispered, "Why did you leave your home, Iain?" There was no mockery in her voice, no challenge. Just genuine compassion, an understanding he hadn't expected. Part of him wanted to dismiss the question coldly, but another part, the more vulnerable one, was tempted to yield. He took a deep breath. "My story is nothing like yours, Eleanor. After what you've told me, I'm ashamed to speak of my past. It's just a common story, painfully trivial." "I doubt it's as trivial as you say," she replied softly. "If it were, you wouldn't have left everything behind. I think you were desperate." Iain squinted, surprised, and then let out a laugh. "If I'm the devil, then you are too." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture of silent surrender. "Maybe." Her composure was fascinating. Not only did she fight like a man, but she also spoke like one, straightforward, unafraid.
"Was it because of a woman?" she asked suddenly with a slight smile.
Iain felt his body tense. His pupils contracted, his jaw hardened. It was time to end the conversation. "We should continue down the path before it gets colder. I'll take you to your room." She didn't press further.
But by the expression on her face, he knew she had guessed the truth.
Or at least, she had figured out enough. They walked a few steps in silence, until Eleanor asked, "Does your father plan to invade Scotland?" Iain stopped. "I have no idea, Captain. I'm just his daughter." His daughter, but not just that. She was a soldier. A soldier with a purpose, a cause that went beyond her lineage. And suddenly, he wondered if her capture had been part of a larger plan. "Didn't you have a plan when you crossed the border?" Eleanor looked at him serenely. "No, none." He didn't believe her. Not completely. When they reached the room that had been assigned to her, he pushed the door open and indicated for her to enter. "Is this all right?" Eleanor scanned the room with her eyes. "Yes, it's perfect. Thank you, Captain. I truly appreciate the gesture. I just hope that—" She suddenly stopped, her eyes wide open. "What?" She turned her face, hiding her expression.
Nothing.
It's perfect, thank you. He studied her for a moment. If you need anything, I'm next door. Eleanor blinked, surprised. Are you going to bed now?
No, I still have work to do.
She seemed to hesitate for a moment before asking. Do you have any books to lend me? There was worry in her voice, a shadow that hadn't been there before. He nodded.
I have some in my room.
I'll go get them. When he returned with the books, he found her at the door of her room, watching him. You're very meticulous, she said in a whisper.
I like things to be in their place. That's reassuring. Certainly.
The silence between them grew thick, heavier, darker. Could I read near you while you work? I don't like being alone, especially when night falls. He squinted.
How have you managed this week then?
I've slept during the day and stayed awake at night. Every night?
Yes.
I haven't closed my eyes for a second. Iain felt a pang of guilt. Would it be enough if I'm in the next room? Eleanor hesitated.
I don't know.
Maybe. But I'll retire to my room. She took the books he offered. Their hands brushed. It was just a fleeting touch, but the sensation shot through him like lightning. Thank you, she whispered. Good night, my lady. She disappeared into her room. Iain stood there watching her, his heart pounding. God. I was about to kiss her. And if he had, he wouldn't have stopped there. Chapter 7. Beyond steel and blood, love fights its own battle. Eleanor entered her chamber and closed the door behind her, her hands trembling slightly. She leaned against the wooden surface, feeling its cold hardness in contrast to the heat still coursing through her body. Her breath was uneven, her heart pounding in her chest. She cursed silently. That man, that damn Scot, had the power to unsettle her in a way she had never experienced before. She hated him, yes, with every fiber of her being, and yet that night. She shook her head, as if the motion could banish the thoughts assaulting her. No, that was enough. She had to focus on her goal, escape. She had to get away. She approached the window, and let the wind lash against her face, a sharp slap of reality. From there the view was imposing, but all she sought was a possible way out. The ground several meters below looked soft yet risky. On foot, she wouldn't get far without being captured. She needed to reclaim her mare, but doing so without raising suspicion was nearly impossible. She had to earn the captain's trust. If she could get him to let her work in the kitchens, perhaps she could hide in one of the supply carts. She sighed. It was a fragile plan, but better than nothing. And at least for now, her father had sent no reply to the message Kerr had sent him. Was he negotiating? No, she couldn't give in to those barbarians. She turned toward the bed, lost in thought. Pulling the dagger from her boot, she slid it beneath the pillow before lying down, just for a moment, just to rest a little, but sleep claimed her before she could think any further. The dawn woke her with its diffused light filtering through the crude window. She sat up abruptly, shaking off the drowsiness, and drank from a cup left on the table. Beer. Cold and comforting. She poured herself another and downed it in one gulp, feeling the burn course down her throat. She needed courage. She stepped out of the room and descended the tower with firm strides, convinced she would be the first to wake. But as she reached the bottom of the staircase, she saw him. Iain Kerr was already tending to his morning ablutions.
The captain is expecting me, she announced to the guard with studied confidence.
The man hesitated, eyeing her warily, but before he could react, Ian's voice rang out with calm authority. It's fine. Let her through. Go get something to eat. I'll keep an eye on her. The soldier obeyed without question and retreated, leaving Eleanor alone with him. Keep an eye on me, she murmured wryly as she stepped closer.
What a relief that is, Captain.
She plunged her hands into the cool crystalline water, rubbing her face slowly, savoring the invigorating sensation. She knew he was watching. She could feel it. And when her shirt dampened, clinging to her form, she also knew it had not gone unnoticed. She lifted her gaze. The captain's eyes burned. Then, for no apparent reason, she let her own gaze roam over him with equal audacity. She observed him as she had the night before. His soaked shirt clung to his skin, tracing the hard lines of his torso with undeniable clarity. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice lower than usual.
Yes. But something in his expression made her doubt.
He did not look well rested. She seized the advantage. "Could I go to the kitchens today?" she inquired with feigned innocence.
"I promise I won't try to escape."
"If you prefer, you can watch over me yourself." Her voice was a veiled challenge. She was provoking him. And she knew it. She wetted her lips, in no hurry to fasten the shirt that still revealed too much. She liked that he was looking. She didn't understand why, but she liked it. Iain narrowed his eyes, as if reading her intentions. "I am not ruthless, but let me remind you, you are still my prisoner, not my guest."
"That's not what you said last night."
"Don't play with words." His tone hardened. "You are my prisoner, and I am your jailer. We must keep our distance. Go back to your room." "Are you serious?"
"Yes."
"Obey, or I'll have you taken to a cell." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't fear him, but she understood she wouldn't get anything more from him. For now. "And if I refuse? Then I'll throw you over my shoulder and do it myself." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at her lips. Tempting. The dangerous gleam in Kerr's eyes warned her not to keep playing. But it was already too late. "Don't test my patience, miss." She took a step closer, chin lifted in defiance. "Perhaps you'll be the one at a disadvantage, Captain. I remind you, I run faster than you." She spun on her heels and bolted toward the tower.
But she didn't get far.
Iain caught her halfway up the stairs, his hand closing around her wrist. Eleanor twisted in his grip and without thinking, slapped him with all her strength. He didn't even flinch. In one swift motion, he shoved her against the stone wall. The impact stole her breath. "Don't ever do that again," he growled, his voice taut with restrained fury. His gaze, dark and intense, locked onto hers. Eleanor barely had time to react before Kerr's lips crashed against hers in a wild, searing kiss. The world disappeared. She felt his body pressing into hers, his heat, his strength. His chest against her belly. And instead of repulsion, a scorching desire ignited deep inside her. She wanted more. With a desperate effort, she shoved him away. She raised her hand, ready to strike him again, but he was faster, seizing her wrist in a firm grip. "Don't do that again. I forbid it." But Eleanor wasn't listening. Because in the captain's eyes there wasn't just fury, there was something deeper, something far more dangerous. And this time, she was the one who kissed him. She claimed his mouth with the same hunger he had shown before. Iain groaned against her lips and, releasing her wrist, pulled her even closer, crushing her against him. His hands slid down to her hips, gripping her without hesitation, pressing her hard against his arousal. Desire roared through her. Iain was the first to break the contact. His forehead rested against hers as his breath came in ragged gasps. "We shouldn't, Eleanor. We have no right." She swallowed hard. He was right.
But this was only the beginning.
Chapter 8. Iain wasn't angry. But he wasn't at peace either. A week had passed, yet nothing had changed. That stagnation exasperated him. That, and everything else. Everything else had a single name: Eleanor. His prisoner. His damnation. Since that stolen kiss, his mind had been a battlefield, assaulted mercilessly by the image of the Englishwoman. He had buried himself in his duties, spending his days outside the fortress, riding until exhaustion, meeting with other captains, dealing with the English threat. He had even travelled to the border, where he found the governor in a pitiful state. The man wouldn't survive much longer. And who would take his place when he died? He had pictured himself at Dunnottar, ruling over that vast domain by the sea, where the wind lashed the castle battlements and the view from the parapets was breathtaking. There, in that indomitable stronghold, he saw himself spending the rest of his days. That was why he had written to the king requesting the position, and that very morning, his letter had been sent.
But what did his ambitions matter, when his body burned with the memory of Eleanor?
He never should have kissed her. And yet, from the moment he first laid eyes on her, his desire had been a constant battle. The image of her skin bathed in the dim light of dawn, the way her nipples hardened beneath her shirt, it tormented him. He had relished that game of provocations, the thrill of chasing her, of feeling her resistance, of holding himself back at the last moment when every fiber of his being cried out to claim her. But he was no barbarian. She was his prisoner. Under his protection. And if he took her, he wouldn't just dishonor her, he could doom them both. So he had made a decision: he would leave. He would put distance between them, even if only for a few days. He would go to see the king, and with any luck he would find in court the distraction he needed to rid her from his mind.
But fate had other plans.
That night, when Duncan entered his study holding a parchment, Iain felt a knot of anticipation tighten in his stomach. "A message from the king, my captain?" He took the document, and tore it open impatiently. His eyes scanned the brief order written in James III's firm hand. "Come immediately. And bring the Englishwoman with you." The parchment burned in the fireplace, but his unease did not burn away with it. Why did the king want to see her? James III was known for his weakness for young, beautiful women. Did he intend to make her his mistress? The thought unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Wasting no time, he headed for her quarters. Outside her door, he paused for a moment, listening to the soft murmur of her breathing beyond the wood. How many nights had he spent imagining her there, mere steps away, yet completely out of reach? He knocked. It took her a few seconds to open, and when she did, her mere presence hit him like a punch to the gut. "Iain?" Her voice. His name on her lips. God help him. He swallowed hard and averted his gaze. If he allowed himself to look at her too long, his resolve would waver. But the bed behind her, the warmth of the room, the faint scent of lavender on her skin. Everything invited him to lose himself in her. He forced himself to focus on what needed to be said. "The king has summoned me. We leave at dawn." Eleanor frowned. "Do you know what he wants with me?"
"I have no idea."
His voice came out harsher than he intended. The truth was he did have a suspicion, and the thought made his stomach twist. James III was not a man who accepted refusal. If he wanted Eleanor, he would have her, and no matter how much the idea made his blood boil, there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Before we leave," she said after a moment of silence, "could you provide me with different clothing? I can't present myself before the king dressed like this." His gaze dropped involuntarily to her body. The white shirt she wore, though clean, hinted at the tempting lines of her figure, and the fitted breeches accentuated the length of her legs. "I'd prefer you not dress as a woman," he said, more command than request. "And why is that?" His jaw tightened. "The king might." He hesitated, eyes sweeping over her. "He might try to seduce you." Eleanor arched a brow, a dangerous challenge flashing in her eyes. "Oh. Then, perhaps I'll let myself be seduced." Iain felt his entire body coil tight. She was playing with him. He could see it in the slight curve of her lips, in the spark of provocation dancing in her gaze. God help him, he wanted to kiss her. He wanted to trap her in his arms, and erase the thought of any other man from her mind.
But who was he to forbid her?
He was not her owner. Not her husband. Just her jailer. So he turned away, cold and resolute. "Be ready at dawn," he ordered before walking out. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Because if he did, he would no longer be able to pretend he didn't want her. Chapter 9. When duty calls but the heart refuses to surrender. The Scotsman's silhouette faded into the shadows, as Eleanor closed the door behind her. She stood still, her back pressed against the wood, her heart still racing. She hated the way her body reacted to him, the way her breath quickened every time he was near. And yet, she couldn't help it. The murmuring of the guards in the courtyard barely reached her ears, but whenever a horse neighed or hooves struck the stone, her instincts betrayed her, and she rushed to the window. She searched for him, without wanting to admit that she did. She found him easily, so tall, so commanding in his warrior's stance. There was something about him, a presence that unsettled her as much as it drew her in. He was a walking contradiction, a mix of harshness and tenderness that stirred emotions within her she wasn't ready to face. She pulled away from the window, with an exasperated sigh. Shrugging off her cloak, she unfastened her vest with restless fingers. She needed to calm herself. But her mind refused to relent. She thought of the kiss. The kiss she still felt on her skin, in her breath, in the frantic beat of her heart. She didn't know if she wanted to relive it so she could seduce him and betray him more easily, or if she wanted it simply because she longed to lose herself in it. She shook her head, irritated with herself. No. Iain was nothing but her captor. An enemy. An obstacle between her and her freedom. And yet, that night her dreams betrayed her. In the shadows of her slumber, her mind conjured a disturbing scene. In it the King of Scotland tried to force himself on her, and at the last moment Iain burst in to save her. But in the struggle, her dagger found its way to his chest. And just as the blade was about to sink into his flesh, something stopped her. Something stronger than vengeance. Desire. The same desire that wrapped around her now as she woke, her skin burning, her body coiled with a need she didn't fully understand. She pressed a hand to her stomach, shivering. No. She couldn't allow herself such weakness. She forced herself to remember her purpose. Her father had not responded to the Scots letter. There were no signs of rescue, no promises of redemption. Had he abandoned her? Was this her fate? No. If no one was coming for her, she would have to find her own way out. And if that meant playing with Iain Kerr's desire, then so be it. At dawn she was dressed and ready. She adjusted her cloak with the belt and waited. Her patience was rewarded when the knock sounded at the door. She rose and opened it. Iain stood before her, his imposing figure framed against the dim light of the hallway. His expression was stone, but his dark eyes devoured her for an instant before looking away. Here. His deep voice wrapped around her, as he handed her a thick jacket, similar to his own, along with a leather belt. This will keep you warmer. And the belt will hold your cloak in place. Eleanor took the garment, without breaking eye contact. Thank you, Captain. For a brief moment his gaze darkened, but he said nothing else. He only inclined his head and walked away. She closed her fingers around the fabric of the jacket, feeling the weight of the gesture. Why did he protect her, if he insisted on keeping his distance? Why care for her well-being while treating her with such coldness? Confused, she put on the garment and descended into the courtyard. The Scot was waiting by the horses. He extended his clasped hands to help her mount. Are you going to tie me up? She asked, a defiant smile playing on her lips. Iain held her gaze. No, if you promise not to attempt an escape. Eleanor tilted her head with feigned innocence. I promise, Captain. To the saddle, he ordered, ignoring her mocking tone. Is this how our relationship will be from now on, Captain? He tensed. You are my prisoner, Eleanor Stafford, and as such you owe me obedience. She scoffed and muttered under her breath. Go to hell. What was that? Nothing. She took advantage of his momentary distraction to make a sudden escape, but she had barely tightened the reins when his firm hand caught them, halting her mount effortlessly. "I'm beginning to wonder how much your word is worth, my lady." His tone was dangerous, but there was something else beneath it. Something she could use to her advantage. She met his gaze and blinked with false innocence. "I won't do it again." Iain studied her for a moment, then released the reins. "I hope not." He mounted his horse with the effortless grace of a predator, and gave the order to depart. Eleanor felt his gaze on her as they rode. She smiled to herself. Yes, he desired her. And soon, very soon, his desire would be his weakness. Chapter 10. The butler reappeared, with an impassive expression, announcing the king's command. "Captain, the king wishes to see you." Iain nodded, casting one last glance at Eleanor before crossing the room. The door closed behind him, with a faint echo that seemed to resonate in his chest. James III awaited him, seated in a high-backed chair, dressed in his customary colors, red and gold. His black velvet cap gleamed under the candlelight, highlighting his carefully trimmed beard and sharp, piercing eyes. Iain bowed with respect. "Your Majesty." "Captain Kerr, what a pleasure to see you again."
"The pleasure is mine, Your Majesty."
The king gestured for him to take a seat. On the table, a sea of parchments and documents suggested that affairs of state had been interrupted for this meeting. "So you've captured an Englishwoman?"
"Yes, Your Majesty."
James III offered a fleeting smile.
"Tell me all about it."
Iain recounted the encounter with his prisoner in precise detail, the circumstances of her capture, her identity, and the precautions he had taken to alert the other captains. The king listened in silence, drumming his fingers lightly against the armrest of his chair. Finally he spoke. "You will escort her home, and then proceed to the governor's fortress." Iain felt his breath quicken.
"Your Majesty?"
"I have considered your request. Sir Thomas Lyon will grant you the position, if you arrive in time. I have heard his condition is dire. You leave tomorrow." The captain nodded solemnly, though inside his entire being pulsed with restrained excitement. "Thank you, Your Majesty. It is a great honor."
"You deserve it, Kerr."
"Your family has served the crown well, and it is time they are rewarded." Iain placed a hand over his chest and bowed. "My brothers will be grateful." The king stood, marking the end of the conversation.
"Now, let us meet your prisoner."
The captain concealed his unease beneath an impenetrable expression. He disliked the thought of leaving Eleanor alone with the monarch. Still, he followed him to the door, which the guards swiftly opened. In the adjoining chamber, Eleanor waited with the bearing of a dethroned queen. Despite the exhaustion evident on her face, her beauty was undeniable, and the golden candlelight deepened the blue of her eyes. For an instant, the gazes met. It was only a second. A second in which everything left unsaid hung between them, unspoken but understood. "Come closer, English lady," the king commanded. Eleanor walked past Iain without looking at him. He felt her warmth, her scent, the tangible presence of something he was about to lose forever. The door closed behind her. And with that dull sound, Iain knew the separation had already begun. The guards shut the door behind her with the soft creak of its hinges. Eleanor, her pulse still unsteady with uncertainty, let her gaze sweep over the room the king had brought her to. To her relief, it was not his personal chambers but a study. A massive dark wood desk dominated the space, cluttered with parchments and inkwells, while heavy tapestries adorned the walls, muffling the echoes of the fire crackling in the hearth. Even so, she did not lower her guard. She had no idea what to expect from this encounter, and she had steeled herself for the worst. If the monarch intended to treat her as just another whim of the court, he would find her resistance unwavering. She was no Scottish lady-in-waiting, no helpless maiden. She was Eleanor Stafford, daughter of an English noble with enough influence to ensure her disappearance would not go unnoticed. And while the king's company might be an honor to many, to her, it brought nothing but unease. The thought of Iain Kerr flickered through her mind. What had the king meant when he spoke of a new post for him? The satisfaction she had glimpsed in the captain's face told her the news was significant. Did that mean he would be sent away? Would he leave that very night? The mere thought of never seeing him again tightened her chest. "Dear Miss Stafford, please take a seat," the king said, his affable tone at odds with the intensity of his gaze. Eleanor obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair he indicated. She kept her back straight, hands clasped in her lap, and waited. James III studied her with evident interest before leaning back in his chair. "So you are the daughter of Sir Edmund Stafford," he mused, as if summoning an old memory. "I met your parents long ago, before you were born." A pang struck Eleanor's chest. "Do you know my mother has passed?" "I have just been informed," he said, without much emotion. "King Henry told me." She nodded, her mind suddenly restless. If the English king had shared news of her mother's death, had he also told the truth about her father? Did James III know what Lord Stafford was plotting? She chose not to ask. "Have you any word of my father?" she finally asked, attempting to break the silence settling between them. For the first time since entering the room, she felt truly vulnerable. She wished Iain were by her side. The thought startled her. She had grown used to his presence, his protection, even his surliness. And with a quiet unease, she realized she missed him. "Indeed," the king replied with a faint smile. "Henry has given his good word, and you will be allowed to return home." Her heart leapt. At last. Finally she would be going home, far from these hostile lands. But the initial relief quickly faded. Her father would not accept this outcome. Not after what had happened. "Now," she asked, her voice carefully measured. "You will leave tomorrow," the king clarified, a gleam in his eyes that unsettled her. "And Captain Kerr will escort you." Her heart lurched. She would see him again. She kept her emotions in check and merely nodded, forcing herself to remain composed. "Miss." She had not heard the king's words, lost in thought. When she looked up, he was standing. She rose as well, relieved that the conversation was ending. Thankfully, despite the glances he had given her, the king had made no advances. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she said quickly. "I was lost in my thoughts. It will be a pleasure to return home." "I understand." James III gave a smile she did not like. "Would you do me the honor of attending tonight's dinner and ball?" Eleanor inclined her head in a polite nod. "It would be my honor, Your Majesty." "Do you know if the captain will attend?" she asked before she could stop herself. The king let out a small laugh. "I have invited him, but like his officer Duncan, he does not care for such festivities. So I do not know if he will come."
"We shall see then," she said, masking her disappointment.
"I will have you escorted to your chambers. The ladies of the court will see to your needs. You will have everything required to make yourself beautiful tonight." He let the words hang in the air, his eyes glinting with something that did not bode well. Eleanor felt her skin prickle. The implication was there, unspoken but clear. If she dressed for the occasion, it would be to captivate someone. And that someone would not be the king. No. Iain Kerr's image appeared in her mind with terrifying clarity. That thought struck her hard. She no longer dreamed of killing him. She no longer saw him as an enemy. She wanted to see him again. She wanted to talk to him. She pushed the thought away before it could take root. She bid the king farewell with another curtsy, promising to see him at the ball. But deep inside, she swore to stay as far away from him as possible. As the maids led her to the chambers assigned to her, Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine at their proximity to the king's quarters. The message was clear. Access to her would be easy. The pieces of the game were shifting. And if she didn't act soon, she would find herself trapped in a game she had no desire to play. Chapter 11. The grand banquet hall was bathed in the warmth of countless torches and chandeliers, their flickering light dancing over the long table laden with exquisite delicacies and pitchers brimming with spiced wine. Seated among a group of court ladies, Eleanor concealed her unease, though her mind and heart were fixated on a single expectation: the captain's arrival. And when she finally saw him enter, her pulse quickened, betraying her. His imposing, proud presence commanded the room, the moment he crossed the threshold. He walked with that effortless confidence so typical of warriors, oblivious to the murmurs rising in his wake. Several ladies followed him with their eyes, whispering behind veiled laughter. An unusual restlessness stirred within Eleanor.
"He's handsome, isn't he?"
a feminine voice suddenly said beside her. Eleanor turned to her companion. It was Isabella, one of Queen Margaret's young maids. Her golden hair and porcelain skin contrasted with the intensity of her smile. Throughout the evening, Eleanor had found her company unexpectedly pleasant. "He is," she admitted unwillingly.
"You're not the only one who thinks so."
Isabella chuckled softly, discreetly gesturing toward a group of women watching him with admiration. Eleanor tore her gaze away from the captain and focused on her goblet. She didn't want to appear too interested, though her mind continued to analyze his every move. "His officer Duncan also caught the court's attention," Isabella went on, clearly entertained. "They say he was once betrothed to a laird's youngest daughter." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Him?" "No, his officer Duncan," Isabella clarified. "As for Iain, there was a time when he wanted to marry his childhood love, but she turned him down. She chose to become a healer rather than wed him."
"And what did he do?"
"He left for the Highlands and became a soldier." A spark of curiosity flared in Eleanor.
"Does he have more officers?" "Yes, his brother is the laird of his clan."
Eleanor pondered this revelation. A man like Iain Kerr must have had many paths open to him, and yet he had chosen the way of the warrior. As if sensing her gaze, he lifted his eyes and the gazes locked. The air between them grew heavier, as though for a fleeting moment the crowd and the clamor of the hall faded into nothing. The captain did not look away. "I have a feeling he's interested in you," Isabella murmured with a knowing smile. Eleanor took a moment to respond. "I know him," she finally said. Isabella looked at her in surprise. "You do?" "I was his prisoner at Ferniehurst Fort," she confessed in a low voice. Isabella gasped, gripping Eleanor's hand. "Tell me everything." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably at the sudden intimacy, and gently withdrew her hand.
"There's not much to tell." "What is he like?"
Isabella pressed, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Eleanor glanced at Iain again. "Brooding." "That only makes him more attractive," the young woman murmured, sighing. "I love his warrior's aura." Eleanor averted her gaze, unsettled by her companion's enthusiasm. "But no one has ever heard of any conquests," Isabella continued. "Some women say he has never been with anyone. That he has kept his love for just one person." An irrational flicker of satisfaction sparked within Eleanor at those words. "Perhaps," she murmured noncommittally. The captain was still watching her from across the hall, even as other men approached to congratulate him on his promotion. He never took his eyes off her, and Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine beneath that unwavering gaze. At that moment, the king struck his goblet with a knife, drawing the attention of the room. Eleanor felt a chill as his gaze settled on her. "My dear friends, I have an important announcement to make," he declared solemnly. Captain Kerr stepped forward. The murmurs in the hall grew louder as the Scotsman advanced to the center. He stood firm, placing a hand over his heart in a sign of respect. "Some of you already know that Sir Thomas Lyon lies on his deathbed. As he has no heir, it falls to me to name his successor. And so, I present to you the new governor of the Borderlands, Iain Kerr." Applause thundered through the hall, and the captain bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I hope to be worthy of this great honor, and the immense responsibility that comes with it." Eleanor concealed her reaction behind her goblet. Governor of the Borderlands. He was now a man of even greater power, with more responsibilities. A far more formidable adversary. Now, Governor, you are the kingdom's first line of defense, the king added with pride. And the one entrusted with ensuring peace in these lands. The captain's eyes gleamed for an instant before seeking Eleanor once more. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze spoke volumes. A silent challenge. She held his stare. The message was clear. If her people attempted to cross the border, they would find him standing in their way. Her fate was sealed. And yet, in that very moment, the only thing she could feel was the searing intensity of Iain Kerr's gaze, stripping her soul and her body bare with the same burning force. The night air wrapped around her with its coolness, but it was the warmth of his body that Eleanor felt most intensely. He held her firmly, with that natural command he had over everything he touched. In his embrace there was no hesitation, no doubt, only the certainty that he would do what was right, as he always did. She lifted her gaze, intoxicated not only by the whiskey but by his nearness. His eyes burned like embers under the dim candlelight, and the way he looked at her, with a mix of patience and something else she couldn't quite decipher, sent a shiver through her. "I shouldn't have drunk so fast," she whispered, feeling the dizziness of her own audacity. He didn't answer right away. He simply watched her, his expression a shadow of something Eleanor couldn't quite grasp. He didn't seem angry, nor amused, nor even compassionate. His gaze was unfathomable. "I warned you," he finally said, his deep, steady voice carrying the weight of a reminder that she had chosen this fate herself. Eleanor let out a soft laugh, a light, barely contained sound meant more for herself than for him.
"Yes, but I have the terrible habit of doing as I please."
Something in the hardness of his expression eased. Just a flicker, a slight pull at the corner of his lips. Not quite a smile, but not indifference either. Without another word, he carried her to her room, with the same determination he carried into battle. Eleanor felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her side, a firm, unyielding rhythm. A sound that in that moment seemed more reassuring than any promise. When they reached her chambers, he laid her down carefully on the bed. Eleanor felt the softness of the sheets, but the absence of his warmth was immediate. As if the heat, radiating from him, vanished all at once, leaving her with a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. She sat up slightly, lips parted, on the verge of calling out to him, to ask him to stay, to watch over her sleep like a sentinel in the dark. But he moved first, averting his gaze and putting a careful distance between them.
"Rest, Eleanor.
Tomorrow, everything will be clearer." She nodded, though deep inside she knew nothing would be clearer by morning. Not when her heart pounded like this, when her mind wavered between hatred and longing, when every part of her seemed to scream that the battle that truly mattered was not the one she had planned since childhood, but the one she was fighting now deep within her own chest. She closed her eyes, listening to the echo of his footsteps fading away. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself the luxury of feeling safe. Eleanor and the fear that disguised her heart. Eleanor Stafford had always believed that hatred kept her safe. Since childhood she had been taught that the Scots were her enemy, that they deserved nothing but her contempt and fury.
But what she had never allowed herself to see was that her disdain was not just for them, it was for all men.
Deep inside she harbored a fear so ingrained it had become a second skin, the fear of betrayal, of abandonment, of vulnerability. Ever since her mother had been torn from her life, Eleanor had learned that to love was to lose. That opening one's heart was an invitation to suffering. And that the only way to survive was to harden herself. She grew up convinced that she had to be strong, untamed, that she must never allow a man to decide her fate. So when she was captured by Iain Kerr, she did not see just an enemy on the battlefield, she saw the embodiment of everything she feared and despised.
But love, like truth, cannot be hidden forever.
What had begun as contempt started to transform into something deeper, something Eleanor could not yet name. It wasn't just that Iain failed to be the villain she had expected, his presence revealed a far more unsettling truth, The enemy was not him, but the barrier she had built between her heart and the world. Fear and resentment had shielded her from pain, but they had also stolen from her the chance to know love. And when she finally allowed her walls to crack, she discovered that what she had been searching for all along was not vengeance, but connection. To love was not to surrender. It was not to lose herself. To love was for the first time to dare to be free. Chapter 12. Eleanor felt the air burn in her lungs as Iain disappeared through the door, leaving her alone with the fire still smoldering on her skin. She collapsed onto the pillows, her heart pounding wildly, her breath uneven, frustration boiling in her veins. She had wanted him to stay, to give in, to wrap her in those strong arms and show her what she had already seen in his gaze. But instead, he had walked away. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if that could chase away the emptiness his absence left behind. He had possessed the restraint she lacked. Turning on the mattress, she hugged herself. Her deepest desires tormented her, a fire she couldn't quench. She was used to having her will imposed on others, to having every whim indulged without question. Her father had raised her like a princess, lavishing her with attention, perhaps to fill the void her mother had left. But Iain, he defied her at every turn. From the very beginning. And yet, why did he reject her? Why, when his eyes screamed the same thing she felt? She pressed her lips together, frustrated. She should call him back, force him to stay. If she kissed him, if she threw herself at him, he wouldn't be able to resist. She hadn't been mistaken, she had seen it, that fire in his gaze didn't lie. He wanted her. She sighed. That damn Scot had upended her life. It was her last thought before sleep claimed her. Iain poured himself another glass of whiskey and downed it in one gulp, letting the burn scorch his throat. He dropped onto the bench before the fireplace, his muscles tense, his mind clouded by restrained desire. God help him. How he wanted her. He longed to pull her against him, to bury his fingers in her hair, to lose himself in her skin. But he forced himself to stay put, to resist the pull of the door that separated them, even as every fiber of his being urged him to cross it. He knew it was a risk even to remain in this antechamber. Eleanor Stafford was not just any woman, she was not a fleeting dalliance, and he could not allow himself to forget that. It was still his duty to escort her home. To protect her. And protecting her meant resisting her. He sighed, running a hand over his face. Soon this would all be over. Eleanor would return to her father, and he would leave for Dunnottar, his new home. Perhaps then he would find some peace. Though he doubted it, with the memory of her skin haunting his every thought. But they were not out of danger yet. And the worst was yet to come. The scream shattered his thoughts. Iain shot up from the bench, unsheathing his sword in one swift motion, and shoved the door open. His gaze swept the room, searching for the threat. His heart pounded against his ribs when he found her. Eleanor was alone, thrashing in the bed, caught in a nightmare. He sheathed his sword with a sigh of relief and moved toward her. Climbing onto the bed without hesitation, he took her hands in his, trying to soothe her with gentle words. Eleanor. His voice dropped to a murmur. It's just a dream. I'm here. She whimpered in the darkness, her body trembling beneath his fingers. His instinct was to pull her against him, but he held back. Easy, no one will hurt you, he whispered. She struggled at first, still lost in her nightmare. Her legs kicked, her hands pushed against him. But his voice reached her little by little, like a balm. And then her eyes opened. She looked at him with such intensity that it struck him like a blow to the chest. Before he could stop himself, his mouth found hers. Eleanor gasped against his lips, but she didn't pull away. On the contrary, she pulled him closer, her fingers gripping his shirt, demanding more. She moaned into his mouth, pressing against him, and Iain felt the heat consume him, searing. But reason won. He pulled away suddenly, his breath ragged, his body screaming for what he had just denied himself. Eleanor stared at him, confused, her lips swollen from the kiss. Iain said nothing. He simply rose, turned his back to her, and walked out of the room, shutting the door behind him. He poured himself another drink, trying to douse the fire she had ignited in him. But he didn't have time to recover. The second scream sent him into action. Unsheathing his sword, he ran back into the room, his chest tightening at the sight before him. One of the king's servants had Eleanor in a tight grip, dragging her toward a hidden door behind the bed. Iain saw red. "Let go of that woman." His voice thundered through the chamber, as his sword pointed at the intruder. The servant froze. "Go and tell the king that this woman belongs to me." Eleanor held her breath. "If he insists," Iain continued, "he will have to face Clan Kerr. And all of the Highlands." The servant eyed him warily. "This woman is yours?" "Of course. I was about to ask for her hand. Had you arrived a minute later, you would have found us sealing our engagement with a kiss." Eleanor's eyes widened, but she said nothing. The servant smirked. "Very well then. Do it." "Excuse me." "Kiss her." Iain nearly laughed at the absurdity of the situation. He turned to Eleanor, raising an eyebrow. "May I kiss you, my lady?" She hesitated but nodded. He moved in slowly, his hands sliding up to cradle her face. When their lips met, Eleanor clung to him as if her life depended on it. A searing heat coursed through Iain, but he refused to let himself give in. Satisfied, the servant left the way he had come. Iain pulled back carefully. Their eyes met. "We're leaving," he ordered. "You're nothing but a brute, Iain Kerr." He smirked wryly. "Perhaps. But I'm the brute who just saved you." Without looking back, he started walking, knowing Eleanor would follow. But suddenly she grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. Her eyes blazing with fury and something deeper, something raw, locked onto his. "Why did you kiss me?" "Because I had to." "No, before." Iain narrowed his eyes. "That was a mistake." "Yes, just like the last time." "Who are you trying to fool, Captain?" She stepped closer, dangerously close. "You want me." "I know it." Iain felt his control crack. "Perhaps, but not anymore." She challenged him with her gaze. He exhaled. "We leave now. Unless you'd rather stay and face the king." Her expression flickered. "Will you get into trouble for this?" Iain gave her a sad smile. "Isn't it a bit late to worry about that?" And without another word, he walked on. Eleanor hesitated for only a second, before following him. The weight of scars and the fear of love. Iain Kerr had lived his life in the shadow of duty, forged in the discipline of war, and the solitude of a man who trusted only his sword. From a young age he had learned that love was fragile, a brittle promise that once broken left wounds deeper than any blade. He had given his heart once, with the passion of someone who had yet to know disillusionment, but the end of that love had left an indelible mark on his soul, the certainty that to love was to risk losing. From that moment on, he closed himself off to anything that could weaken his resolve. Duty was safe, loyalty unbreakable, and solitude an impenetrable refuge. But fate was capricious, and life forced him to face precisely what he had been running from. When Eleanor stormed into his life, it wasn't with tenderness or sweet words, but with the fierceness of an enemy and the defiance of a tempest. She was everything he feared, a risk, a possibility, a test. His heart screamed at him to turn away, to resist the trap of feelings, to remember that past pain would save him from repeating history. But true love did not ask for permission, and when he found himself face to face with it, resisting became the hardest battle of all. Pain could teach him to protect himself, but it could also blind him to what could save him. Iain would have to decide whether to cling to his scars, or dare to let love heal him. Because sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't found on the battlefield, it was in giving his heart to someone who could break it, or make it beat again. Chapter 13. Eleanor estaba de pie en el umbral, su figura recortada por la tenulas del paseo. Su cabello caía en desorden sobre sus hombros, y su camisón, apenas cubierto por una capa ligera, de hierba en evidencia que había salido con prisa. Iain no dijo nada. Solo la miró, sintiendo como la tensión volvía a aferrarse a su cuerpo como un grillet. Ella cerró la puerta tras de sí con suavidad, y avanzó un paso. No pudo dormir, su voz fue apenas un susurro, pero el peso de sus palabras quedó suspendido en el aire. Iain pasó una mano por su rostro, como si intentara borrar el cansancio o la creciente frustración que le provocaba su mera presencia. Eleanor. No quiero estar sola. Él apretó la mandíbula. No deberías estar aquí. Ella ignoró su advertencia y dio otro paso, acercándose más. Su mirada era intensa, determinada. Dime que no me deseas, reto en voz baja. Dímelo y me azaré. Iain se quedó en silencio. Su voluntad pendía de un hilo. Eleanor se acercó aún más, hasta quedar justo frente a él. No puede susurró. Él cerró los ojos por un instante, conteniendo un suspiro. Entonces, en un solo movimiento, la atrapó entre sus brazos. Eres una maldita tormenta, murmuró contra su cabello. Ella sonrió apenas antes de que sus labios se encontraran en un beso que, esta vez, ninguno de los dos quiso detener. Eleanor walked towards him, dressed only in her shirt which fell to mid-thigh. The light from the flames in the fireplace outlined her silhouette through the fabric. Her hair fell loose, framing her face with a golden glow. Iain felt the air grow thick in his lungs. Eleanor. She raised a hand and sealed his lips with the tips of her fingers. Shush. I want you, Iain. I want to be yours. The confession struck his chest like thunder. But your future. I'm not your future husband, he stammered. I'll never marry, she declared with certainty. It's you I want. You're the one I want to experience love with. Iain's dark eyes searched hers, as if he still couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're not afraid anymore. You don't hate me anymore. She shook her head, a soft smile on her lips. I'm not afraid anymore. And no, I don't hate you anymore. I want you. The certainty in her voice was his undoing. With a low growl he gripped her firmly and pushed her down beneath him. When their lips met, the kiss was like a fire. His hands traced her skin with an adoration that surprised even him. Eleanor trembled beneath his touch, surrendering without reservation, and that drove him mad with desire. You're the one who tortures me, he whispered with a thick voice as he sank into her warmth. The night was consumed in gasps and whispered words, kisses that seemed endless. Every touch, every shiver of hers beneath him, made him want her even more. When exhaustion finally overtook them, Eleanor curled up against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her as though he feared she might disappear. He kissed her forehead and whispered, Is everything all right? She sighed against his skin, tangling her fingers in his hair. Wonderful. So wonderful. Iain smiled. He couldn't remember a night when he'd felt so complete. She propped herself up a little, resting her face on his shoulder, and looked at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Isabella? He raised an eyebrow. Isabella? What's with her? She told me you were a virgin, Eleanor said with a soft laugh. But seeing how you've handled yourself, I have my doubts. Iain grimaced. Why lie? However, it's true. Eleanor looked at him, surprised. Oh, really? He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch tender and reverent. You're the first, Eleanor. The first woman I've made love to. She blinked, bewildered. I don't believe you. But it's true. Eleanor studied him more closely, as if trying to read his soul. How is that possible? At court, all those women devoured you with their eyes. He sighed. I was never interested in any of them. I made an oath. Tell me about it. He held her gaze, as if for a moment he hesitated to share this part of his life. Finally he exhaled slowly. I gave my heart to a woman a long time ago. A girl from my village. We grew up together. I loved her madly, and I wanted to marry her, but she chose her art over me. Eleanor frowned.
Her art. She became a healer.
And is that incompatible with love? It seems so. Eleanor placed a hand on his chest, tracing his skin with the tips of her fingers. Do you still love her? He shook his head.
I don't know.
I haven't seen her again.
But do you still think about her?
He intertwined his fingers with hers, and looked at her intently. No. Right now, I'm thinking of you, Eleanor. Only you. She smiled softly and caressed his cheek. I'm glad. You'll be in my heart, Iain, for as long as I live. She leaned towards him and placed her lips on his in a sweet, sincere kiss. Iain wrapped her in his arms and kissed her with renewed passion, leaving no room for words. The night was not over yet. Chapter 14. Beyond blood and steel, an unbreakable love. Eleanor woke with the dawn, her body still tangled in the shadows of the night she had shared with Iain. She shuddered as the cold air brushed against her bare skin, and in an almost unconscious instinct, she pulled the heavy furs that lay on the bed over her. Her body, still sensitive from the love they had made, felt deliciously exhausted. Iain slept beside her, his breathing deep and steady, his face serene. For a moment, Eleanor allowed herself the illusion that this moment could last forever. But reality was relentless. In a few hours he and she would part ways, destined never to cross paths again. She felt Iain move beside her, and when she looked up her eyes met his. He gently caressed her chin, and took her lips in a slow, sweet, almost reverent kiss. Eleanor closed her eyes and let herself be carried away by the warmth of his mouth, engraving in her memory that touch she knew would be the last. Did you manage to sleep a little? He asked in his deep voice, the voice that made her shiver. Eleanor swallowed hard the lump that formed in her throat. I wish I never had to leave you, she whispered. I would love to stay like this forever. Iain ran his fingers down her cheek tenderly, but his gaze darkened. I would love that too, Eleanor, but we have no choice. She nodded with resignation. She knew. There were no promises between them. No future. Only that stolen night. But his words hurt her more than she wanted to admit. She felt him pull away before their bodies actually separated, and the pang of sadness that pierced her was like a dagger to the chest. She rose from the bed with a sharp movement, picked up his shirt from the floor and put it on. Iain caught up with her before she could cross the door, and locked her in his arms. Don't go like this. Forgive me.
But there was nothing to forgive.
Eleanor rested her forehead against his chest and squeezed her eyes shut. She couldn't cry. She shouldn't cry. Iain took her face in his hands and forced her to look at him. I will never forget you, Eleanor. I've lived the most wonderful night of my entire life in your arms. She smiled sadly, holding his gaze. I wish you happiness in your new life, she murmured before briefly brushing her lips against his and pulling away. She walked out of the room with firm steps, but as soon as she crossed the threshold, the tears she had been holding back began to fall silently. She couldn't believe how much anguish she felt, how empty she felt. She hated him for making her feel this way, for treating her with that coldness that drove her crazy, but she hated herself even more for having loved him. When she reached the courtyard, she saw him a few meters away, giving orders to his men. She felt invisible to him, as if the night they had shared meant nothing. She swallowed her pride and followed him to his horse. He helped her mount without looking at her, and the coldness of his gesture was confirmation of what she already knew. There was no point in holding on to what was destined to disappear. She rode in silence, keeping her head high, but her mind was trapped in the whirlwind of memories that the previous night had left on her skin and in her soul. And then, before she could prepare herself for it, they reached the border. Hadrian's wall loomed before them, the invisible line that divided two worlds, and from that moment on would separate them forever. Iain pulled on the reins and ordered his men to stop. His voice, firm and cutting, rang with a distance that chilled her soul. "All right, my lady. You are home now." Eleanor felt her heart shrink. She wished he would offer her more than just those empty words, that he would look at her with the intensity he had looked at her with in the shadows of his chamber. But all she found on his face was hardness. She took a breath, forcing herself to be strong. "Thank you, Captain, for taking the time to accompany me. I hope you have a happy life. You deserve it." It was as close as she could come to telling him what she really felt. He held her gaze for a moment. Emotion flickered briefly in his eyes, but it vanished before she could catch it. "You too, Eleanor," he whispered. Her name on his lips was like an echo of everything they couldn't say to each other. Eleanor felt the weight of the farewell in every fiber of her being. The riders that made up his escort appeared on the hill, and the relief of seeing them mixed with the pain of the farewell. Iain watched the men approaching, his gaze hardening.
"Your escort," he said with a slight nod.
"Have you notified them?" she asked. "Of course. I wasn't going to let you return alone." Eleanor gave a small smile. Despite everything, he had cared about her safety. "Go, Captain. It's for the best." He didn't move. His gaze fixed on the approaching riders with a threatening intensity. "Are you sure?" She nodded firmly. "Yes. Please go." But he didn't move until the riders were close enough. His trusted man Robert was leading the group, and when Eleanor saw the look of hatred on his face, she understood that the farewell wouldn't be peaceful. The two men stared at each other from a distance, sizing each other up with the hostility of two warriors who knew that, in another context, they would be facing each other to the death. Iain spoke first. "Take care of her, Stafford." Robert let out a mocking laugh. "Is that a threat?" The captain didn't smile. "Maybe." The air thickened with tension. Robert straightened in the saddle, and spat on the ground with disdain. "You'd better get going, Scott. If I find out you've disrespected her in any way, I'll hunt you down and skin you alive." Iain didn't even blink. The way his hands tightened on the reins was the only sign of his restrained anger. "Better that way," he murmured coldly. His gaze landed on Eleanor one last time. Neither of them spoke, but in that moment they said everything to each other. Eleanor felt the world collapse around her when she saw him turn and spur his horse. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. The goodbye had already been said. And so, with her heart torn, Eleanor understood that her ordeal didn't end at that border. It had only just begun. Chapter 15.
A heart torn between duty and desire.
The silence of the cell weighed on Eleanor like a heavy stone. She could barely distinguish the sound of her father's breathing, which was growing weaker by the moment. She gently embraced him, feeling the fragile tremor of his body beneath her fingers. The dirt and the stench of dampness filled the air, but what tormented her the most was the unshakable sense of hopelessness that hung over that dark corner of the fortress. Robert's words still echoed in her mind. "When hunger keeps you awake, you'll beg me to end your torment."
But he didn't know her.
Not the real Eleanor. He never had. She would not beg. She would not surrender. She took a deep breath, and with an effort she lifted her head. Her tears had dried, leaving behind a steely resolve. Her father would not die there. Not at the hands of his closest officer.
Not while she still had life in her.
She heard footsteps. The door creaked open with a rusty squeal, and one of Robert's men entered. His silhouette was framed by the dim light filtering in from the hallway. "Get up," he ordered, his voice rough. Eleanor didn't move. The man advanced, with the impatience of a jailer accustomed to obedience. He bent down to grab her arm, but she dodged him with a swift turn of her shoulders. "I said get up. I won't move from here until I see my father set free." The guard clicked his tongue in annoyance, and leaned in to grab her by force. But Eleanor, anticipating his move, shot him a look full of defiance. "If you touch me, I swear you'll regret it," she whispered, her stillness freezing the air between them. The man hesitated. Not out of fear, but because of the cold determination in her words. He knew who Eleanor was. He knew that even though she was trapped now, she was still the heir to the fortress.
"Robert is waiting for you," he growled finally without trying to grab her again.
Eleanor stood slowly, smoothing down her dress with a dignified gesture. If she was going to face her first officer, she would do it with her head held high. She took one last look at her father, gently caressing his hand. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I won't let him win." And with one last squeeze she parted from him, turning to follow the guard. The hallway was almost in darkness, barely illuminated by flickering torches on the stone walls. The echo of their footsteps resonated through the gallery, creating a sense of emptiness that only intensified the anguish in her chest. She clenched her fists, forcing herself not to stop. When the great doors of the council chamber opened before her, Eleanor knew she was stepping into the wolf's den. There, in the center of the room, standing by the main table, was Robert. His posture was arrogant, his smile cynical. His dark clothes accentuated the malice that always resided in his gaze. "Finally you deign to show up," he remarked with feigned disdain. Eleanor stopped, just before reaching the table. "I've come because I want to negotiate." Robert let out a dry, mocking laugh. "Negotiate? And what could you possibly offer me, that I can't take by force?" Eleanor held his gaze, impassive. "Your greatest desire," she answered calmly. "My hand." The air seemed to stop in the room. Even Robert, always so confident in his dominance, narrowed his eyes with suspicion. "Keep talking," he finally said. Eleanor took a step forward. "Marry you as you wish, but with one condition." "Condition?" he asked, crossing his arms. "You will release my father. Right now." Robert laughed again, though this time his expression showed interest. "And how do I know you won't betray me afterward?" Eleanor tilted her head, her voice calm but sharp as a dagger. "Because if I do, I'll lose any chance of ensuring my father stays alive." Robert watched her in silence. He knew he was playing a dangerous game. Finally his smile widened. "Fine," he agreed. "But if you betray me, Eleanor, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your days." Eleanor didn't reply. She didn't need to. She already had a plan. And she wasn't going to lose. Chapter 16.
The price of betrayal.
An unrelenting cold filtered through the damp stones of the cell, but Eleanor didn't feel it. Not when the true frost was in her chest, spreading like poison that consumed her. She held her father, his lifeless body still warm against hers, as if life hadn't fully dissipated. But Eleanor knew. He was gone. The pressure in her throat was unbearable, the sobs tearing her soul apart, but she couldn't stop. Every sob that came from her chest was a silent plea, an ancient lament that only the echo of stone could hear.
"Father," she whispered, desperately clutching his hand.
There was no answer. There would never be one again. She didn't know how much time passed like that, cradling him as if her love alone could bring him back to life. But love wasn't enough. It hadn't saved him. Then somewhere within her pain something changed. A new thought emerged from the mist of her sorrow. She felt trembling, weak, but also filled with a silent fury, one that burned her insides with the heat of a sacred vow. Robert. Robert had killed him. With brutal clarity, everything fell into place in her mind. The cell, the abandonment, the fever that consumed him without anyone offering help. Her first officer didn't need to wield a dagger to kill her father. He had let him die slowly, cruelly, denying him the basics, knowing that this way he would get rid of him without anyone being able to accuse him of murder. But she knew. And he would pay for it. A noise at the door pulled her out of her trance. She straightened abruptly, her eyes red from crying, but her gaze firm. She wiped the tears with the sleeve of her dress and clenched her fists. She wouldn't give Robert the pleasure of seeing her broken. The hinges creaked, and the door opened. 2 men entered first, followed by the imposing silhouette of Robert, who advanced with his usual arrogance. His crooked, cruel smile widened when he saw her on the floor next to her father's corpse.
"Well, dear Eleanor," he murmured, stopping just a few steps from her.
What a moving scene. Eleanor didn't respond. She looked at him with cold eyes, not blinking.
"Ah, don't look at me like that," he said, feigning sorrow.
You knew this would happen. It was only a matter of time. A flash of fury crossed her eyes, but Eleanor remained calm. She couldn't allow herself an outburst. Not yet. I hope you understand what this means, Robert continued, crouching down to her level. Now that your dear father and my only relative and close guardian is dead, all of this is mine.
"That's what you think," she whispered, her voice barely a breath.
He raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Eleanor lifted her chin, her pride intact even in misfortune.
"You're a traitor.
And traitors don't rule." Robert laughed. A dry, empty laugh.
"And who's going to stop me?"
"You." His hand rose and took her chin roughly, forcing her to look at him closely. "You have no one, Eleanor. You have no family, no allies, you're alone." She didn't flinch. "You're wrong."
"Oh really?" he mocked.
"And who's going to come to your rescue? Your beloved Scot." For the first time, Eleanor let a small smile cross her face.
"We'll see about that."
Robert's brow furrowed for a moment, doubt crossing his expression like a shadow. But he quickly regained his composure, tightening his grip on her.
"It will do you no good to keep resisting.
You will belong to me, whether you like it or not." Eleanor didn't respond. She looked at him in silence, with the certainty of someone who had already made a decision.
Robert could think he had won, but the game wasn't over.
And Eleanor Stafford never gave up.